Hey there, guys. Thanks for dropping by, and a very big welcome to the littlest parish in Christendom, the Holy Shed. It's really good to have you here. Now, as you know, we've been spending all of Lent and a little bit more pondering in the Holy Shed stuff connected with my book, The Post-Evangelical, which came out 30 years ago this year. It's been a lot of fun for me, and to be honest, I'm a little bit sad that it's coming towards an end, although I'm pretty sure that many of the themes that we've focused on, the kind of things that are going to crop up a little bit more as we go forwards. The underlying goal or intention of the book, which is also a fair description of much of my life's work for the past 35 years, is to try to make the gospel credible in the contemporary world, in the world that I live in. But to do this especially for those people who feel that their faith is unraveling before their very eyes, or are hanging on to faith by their fingertips and need some support or need some different ways to be able to see things and understand things. And since the book's publication, there's been a pretty steady stream over the years of people wanting to come and talk with me, to take me out for lunch, which is very nice, or take me out for a drink or a walk in the park, so that we can have a conversation that they don't feel that they can have in their churches or with their Christian friends. The fear behind that is the fear of being judged, of deemed a backslider, or worse still, seen as a liberal. And a fair number of these incognito doubters are clergy. One person sent me an email headed Nicodemus by Night, which rather said it all. And of course, the stakes tend to be much higher for clergy, for pastors and church ministers whose job and living and even home may well be on the line. So it's understandable that they don't really want to voice their doubts and theological misgivings to bishops or supervisors, PCCs, or their congregations. Speaking of which, I'd just like to highly recommend a video on Netflix called Come Sunday. It's a moving dramatization of the story of a man called Carlton Pearson. He's not with us any longer, sad to say, but he was one of America's most influential black ministers. And one day he told his congregation about a revelation that he felt God had given him in the night whilst he was watching the TV, and he was looking, this is a while back now, at the plight of people in Rwanda. And it got him thinking that, according to, the gospel that he had preached, a lot of these people that he was looking at who were suffering awful things were going to go to hell. And he just felt God say, that's not true, that can't be. So anyway, I'm not telling you the whole story here, but he told his congregation about this one Sunday, and the outcome of this was that he was excommunicated from his church, from his denomination, from the people who were his peers, because he preached that there's no hell. He also went on to become an LGBTQ ally, and yeah, it's a great film. It's really worth a watch. But it is a sad state of affairs when people have to hide what they really think or believe for fear of being ostracized or rejected by Christian friends or congregations or even from their jobs. Some people who came to see me, or do come to see me, travel hundreds of miles to do that. Some have come on a number of occasions from those kind of distances when they really shouldn't have needed to do that. Debate and difference and friendly, if passionate argument, all of these things, I think, should be part and parcel of any healthy religious community. I think we're supposed to have a variety of different thoughts and ideas that don't always coincide with what other people think or what the policy of the church is. We should be able to openly talk about these things, argue about them, maybe have a friendly chat over a beer or three. And by the way, whenever a group or a society as a whole or a political administration outlaws dissent or just creates a climate of fear or anxiety about people taking a different position, whenever that is happening, red flags should be flying high and vigorously, because it's a sign of insecure, brittle leadership, which is likely to end up in some kind of tyranny or totalitarianism. And fundamentalism, I think, is the religious equivalent of that. Fundamentalism ends up being an ideology that can be quite sort of oppressive and totalitarian. But when you put fundamentalism, the religious thing, and a political thing together, well, I mean, God help us. My own history with these things, my history as a dissenter, goes way back into my time as a house church leader, which I've talked about in the past. As I'm sure you know, I'm an agreeable kind of guy, but I've never really responded well to coercion or being expected to agree even when I don't, which is how I ended up in a public parting of the ways with a very influential colleague called Bryn Jones back in 1979. It was a painful episode, not least because of the loss of friends who I thought were friends for life, but it turned out the friendship was conditional. I recall driving home on the M11 after a crucial meeting in which I was effectively shown the door. It was a case of step into line or else. And as I was driving up the motorway, as I journeyed back, I felt quite shaken. I mean, it was a difficult confrontation, but I was also shaken by what I was increasingly sensing were the consequences of what had just happened, and there were consequences. But I also had this feeling of liberation. I was exhilarated by the sense of, just staying true to myself. The very disappointing thing about that particular breakup is, that it could have gone so differently. It could have had such a different outcome if there'd been room for us to live with difference. And in fact, I think that the movement as a whole would have been much better off if that were the case. As Andrew Walker comments in his brilliant history of the house church movement called Restoring the Kingdom, he commented there that Bryn Jones and me were perfect counterpoints to each other. But you see, a counterpoint suggests a situation where there's a constructive coexistence of difference, where different things find harmony without being forced into changing what they are. And that was never really going to be the case in that situation, I'm afraid. And in that story, in my own story, there is a direct line between that particular experience of sensing that I was in a coercive space and 10 years later, the creation of Holy Joe's, which, as you probably know, was a weekly gathering in a pub in South London, intentionally set up to be a safe space for dialogue, for debate and constructive argument, where people could explore faith together without any judgment on their views, and where there was not going to be an imposed right answer at the end of the evening. An important ingredient of Holy Joe's, I think, was the constant punctuation of humour and banter in those conversations, which not only made them, quite a lot of fun at times, but also punctured egos and ensured that none of us would take ourselves or our views too seriously. And I think that's a healthy place to be. And I think in society generally, that's a big part of what comedy and humour can offer to society. It helps us to climb down from our high horses and recognise our humanity and the humanity of other people in the conversation. Protestant Christianity, on the other hand, and evangelicalism in particular, has often been po-faced about, belief and theology. There's a long history of dependence on dogma and doctrine and belief as the basis of unity instead of experience, which I think is a much more important basis for unity. And yet the fact is, despite the intentional or unintentional pressure on people to sign up to whatever list of doctrines a particular evangelical group or church prioritizes, my observation and experience is that beneath the surface, there's a whole raft of doubts and questions going on. You could look at a given congregation, gathering of people, and think they all look like happy customers. My experience says that is often not the case. And the post-evangelical basically served to lift the lid on some of those doubts. Because, within weeks of its publication, I was deluged with letters and messages that basically said, at last someone has said this. And it was like this great sense of relief that was coming back at me. Because, in a theologically monochrome environment, as many churches are, it can be really hard to shove your hand up and say, hang on a minute, I've got a question here. To take issue with the party line can be really, really hard. So mostly it's just a lot easier to keep stum. But that never makes you feel really good about yourself, does it? Personal validation is massively important for all of us. And my heart has sung with delight many times over these 30 years when folk have told me that the book or a talk I've given has enabled them to feel okay about themselves, to know that they are not alone, to be able and empowered to continue with the faith journey instead of abandoning it, which is what might have happened and what has happened with quite a lot of people. Only this week, you might have seen it, Derek posted about this on Facebook in response to last week's shed. He said, the book that changed my concept of being a Christian. The book that changed my concept of being a Christian. Totally brilliant. And it's not that Derek or anyone else ends up or should end up with precisely my views or my version of faith. That's not the point. The point is the endorsement of one's integrity, the freedom to question and doubt and have a different point of view, arrive at a different conclusion, the freedom to disagree and yet still be part of the discussion and not banished, sent out of the room, to be part of the community, to be genuinely valued, even though your view maybe is one that stands out against everybody else's. The task of the church, in my opinion, is constantly to rewrite and reform the Christian message for new generations, not to preserve it intact as it was. In new cultural and intellectual situations, which are happening all the time, if faith is to evolve and remain relevant and not stagnate, it is utterly imperative that it is reformed, not once or twice, but over and over again. Within Judaism, this process is called midrash. We've talked about this before in the shed. Midrash, which literally means the making new, and it's the making new of ancient truths by translating them into new and current modes of understanding. Okay, that's basically what midrash is about. And we don't exactly have a word for that in the Christian sort of lexicon, but I think we need the reality of it, because faith cannot ever stand still if it isn't going to stagnate and die. It has to be evolving all the time, because life's like that, isn't it? My body's like that, yours is. The whole world, the whole of nature is in a state of flux, of evolving, and faith must be part of that too. Actually, I mean, what I'm talking about is really how tradition properly operates. Okay, there's a difference often between tradition and traditionalism. Traditionalism is when beliefs and practices and rituals become static, fixed, they stagnate. It's like deep frozen religion, and and that's a dead end. Tradition actually is something different. Tradition should never be understood as a process of simply handing down the past beliefs and ideas in some untouched package to be preserved entirely intact from one generation to the next. That's not tradition, that's convention, which is quite a different thing. Tradition is alive and evolving. Convention is dead. Convention is brittle and unyielding. Tradition evokes new life all the time. Convention strangles the life out of things. From the beginning, church authorities have claimed that they're doing the right thing by stamping out heresies, right? Or things that deviate from the accepted, or in reality, from the dominant view at that time in that particular place. But in reality, this kind of witch hunt, this obsession with, eliminating heresy, it really kills off the truth. It strangles the spirit out of the gospel. And the word heresy in its original true form just means to have an opinion. And I think that's a responsible thing, don't you? We're all expected to have an opinion, not just to adopt the opinion of the crowd. So in that sense, maybe heresy we should all be. Picasso rather wonderfully declared that tradition is having a baby, not wearing your father's hat. I love that, don't you? Tradition is having a baby, not wearing your father's hat. And commenting on that quote, the Australian writer and religious academic David Tacey, whose work I like a lot, he says this. He says, conservatives wear their father's hat and think that they're being faithful, because they're just carrying on wearing their dad's hat. But tradition, he says, longs for new life. That's the baby being born. Its spirit, he says, calls for renewal. But conservatives are only interested in revival. Well, that's an interesting comment, really, because I think that distinction between renewal or reformation on the one hand and revival, I think that distinction is pretty crucial. Because, conservative Christians love the idea of revival. They preach about it, sing about it, talk about it all the time. It's almost like, the Holy Grail. But what's meant often is a return to their particular idealized version of the past. It's like this thing, this golden era, this Holy Grail. And so they pray for revival, they look for revival. But you see, conservative Christianity is intrinsically nostalgic. It's obsessed with a romanticized purity of truth and doctrine, which has been lost or which has been undermined and now needs to be restored and then repeated, continually. Ad nauseum was the word I was trying to think of. In America, the white evangelicals who support Donald Trump are clearly a lot less interested in the character or actual faith of the man than they are in, I think, the silly belief that he is chosen by God to restore things in society in America which they see to be supremely important, but which are undermined or under attack by demonic forces like woke, or by the hard left. They love that, don't they? The hard left. Or by, an atheistic, secular agenda. And so there's this great conspiracy sort of feeling, this paranoid feeling that there's all these forces out to sort of, attack the real nature of the Christian faith. And so for them, Trump is God's chosen vessel for the revival of true Christian values. And so it doesn't matter who he is or what's going on in his life or, what he's done. He's the chosen one of God. Actually, I think a lot of what they call traditional Christian values are really a very narrow agenda of things which they have decided are their lines in the sand, things like, what is that? A 1950s idea of the nuclear family, with prescribed gender roles, where mum is mum and dad is dad. They have an agenda of being opposed to deviations to that, family life as God has given it. Deviations by trans people or by the LGBTQ community who are portrayed as a threat to traditional family life, to marriage. I don't know how marriage and traditional life, as it's called, is threatened by other people finding that they're different and just wanting the freedom and space to live authentically to who they are, And there are these things, the obsessive hatred of a woman's right to make choices about her own body, this narrow agenda, which is, really a quite sort of recent obsession of evangelicalism, especially in America. But beyond this current American scene, which, we could rant on forever, conservative Christianity in general tends to get caught up with the whole business of wearing father's hat instead of having babies, engaging creatively with the world to allow new expressions of faith to be born and to emerge. The Christian gospel should not be seen as some unchanging entity to be preserved exactly as it was in the past, but rather as a living organism in a process of constant flux, of constant renewal and change, because that's life. It's not by coincidence that, as well as quoting it early on in the book, I close the post-evangelical with that quote from the German ecologist Rudolf Barrow, who said, "When the forms of an old culture are dying, the new culture is created by a few people who are not afraid to be insecure." I've got to close this series next week, I think, but I believe it's essential that, the point about insecurity that Barrow said, I think that's really important, because nothing of any great value in the world has emerged or been established without struggle and probably insecurity on the part of someone, at least. Just as no baby is born into the world without some level of pain, sometimes an awful lot of pain, but then the outcome is new life. And the thing about babies being born is, we all look at children and sort of say, oh, looks just like dad, or looks like mom, or whatever, or Uncle Charlie. But and that's okay. That's a fun thing to do. But if we were to try to then shape that child's life, forming it to become a replica of that person, be it a parent or whoever, that would be grotesque beyond words. The real thing about a baby coming to the world is to give it the security and the space to find out who she or he is, and then to follow their path. The worst thing that a parent can do in life is try to force children to pursue a path that they think is the right one for them. It's hard, I know. I'm a parent. But in the end, it's about letting them go and letting them be who they are. And I think that's true of Christian truth and tradition too. That instead of trying to hold it all together and keep it, as it once was, and keep it pure and true, I think is a way to strangle the life out of the Christian message and experience. It needs to be born over and over and over again in fresh ways, in new situations. You know, the incarnation, God becoming flesh, happened, definitively in the person of Jesus. But in fact, God is being born again and again and again and again into human life and experience. And each time it will look different, it will feel different, it will pursue a different path, because that is the massive, massive character and diversity of who and what God is. We stand in a place, I think, just now, where traditional Christianity is in rapid and irreversible decline, which I think is no bad thing, because this opens up the challenge to reconnect with the spiritual, mystical heart of the Christian faith in following the way of Jesus. A baby, I believe, is waiting to be born in the world just now, but it requires the willingness of some people to be insecure, to embrace the struggle, and hopefully see the joy of something new. So I'll leave it there right now, and we'll wrap things up probably next week, and think a little bit more about what that might look like. So anyway, here is a prayer to finish with. Restless hearts. Spirit of tall trees, lofty mountains, and wide open skies, we were created to know you in the mystery and wonder of things we can never fully know or understand. The glory of morning light, the haunting hoot of a tawny owl, longings we cannot name or comprehend, bonds of love resisting words or explanation. Our hearts are truly restless until they find their rest in you. That said, may we never cease longing and yearning and searching those further mysteries that forever call us on. May we live in this world with passion, curiosity, and sacred naivete, loving you in all things, but always longing, longing, longing. Amen. So, hey guys, if you like what I'm doing in the Holy Shed, you can support us. You can just buy us a coffee by following the link that's on the screen now. It's something that lots of people do, and we are so grateful to all of you who support us in that way and other ways too. And I'm going to finish very briefly with a toast. If you've got a glass in your hand of something or a mug, I ask you to raise it with me, and let us toast babies, not dad's hats, to life, l'chaim. So there we are. That's all I can do right now, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again next week. Have a great week. It's Holy Week. Every week is holy, but this one's a little bit special, and I trust it will prove very special to you. So, stay human, and I'll see you very soon.